Good morning and welcome to the Maryland Public Service Commission's administrative meeting for November 18th, 2020. I'd like to begin today by recognizing that it is Utility Scam Awareness Day, which is November 18th of every year. This year, we're partnering with Maryland's utilities to remind customers that there are unfortunately a large number of unconscionable con artists and scammers that seek to steal personal information and money from utility customers. Ever since the uptick of the COVID pandemic and with more people staying at home, we've seen an increase in the number of sophisticated contacts by these scam artists to obtain information from the customers under threat of utility disconnections or late penalties. We would remind all of customers in the state of Maryland that your utility will never contact you and demand immediate payment under threat of termination. They'll also not ask for personal information over the phone. They won't ask you to pay via Green Dot or a cryptocurrency. Unfortunately, in this year alone, we've seen customers bilked out of over $170,000 for fear of losing their utility service. So we would remind all customers, please contact your utility. If you don't think the person at the other end of the phone is legitimate, just hang up, contact your utility, and you could check your account history and any past due amounts. On another topic, offshore wind, particularly offshore wind transmission, has been on the mind of many lately. Maryland has been a first mover in this respect when the legislature passed the Maryland Offshore Wind Energy Act of 2012. And in the intervening 8 years, we have yet to see any turbines spinning in the ocean off of our coastline. However, there has been increased attention to the need to develop offshore wind resources. Just yesterday, our Senate Finance Committee held a hearing to look into this matter. And there was an unfortunate recognition that Maryland has gone from the lead of the pack towards the end of the pack right now. Looking at states like New York, Massachusetts, and New Jersey, who have offshore wind commitments in the range of 7,000 to 9,000 megawatts, Maryland's most recent commitment is an additional 1,200 megawatts on top of our pre-approved 368 megawatts. So it does pale in comparison, but that is a decision for the legislature, not the Public Service Commission to make. Notwithstanding, the permitting process at the federal level has moved at a snail's pace. Maryland's two projects are ranked number 4 and 9th in the queue, with no way to speed up the queue process or to move ahead of some slower moving projects in other states. That said, I am happy that the State Commissioners Association, NARUC, last Wednesday approved a resolution by the Board of Directors finding that it is in the interest of state commissions and FERC to have a well-organized and planned transmission grid. I believe an ocean grid is essential to reducing cost of transmission in lieu of building direct radial lines, and that this is an issue that other states are also looking at. In addition to the RTOs, there must be coordination between at least the 3 RTOs on the East Coast. I'm also happy that Governor Hogan, along with the governors of North Carolina and Virginia, last month signed the Smart Power MOU that would bring a sufficient coordination, resulting in additional jobs and economic development. I think Maryland is well positioned, not only because of the talent in the state, but because of its geographic location on the East Coast, to serve as a hub and a deep water port for the staging of a lot of these activities from Massachusetts down to North Carolina. So I think there is some potential, although there is a recognition that there have been some forces outside of the PSC's control and the state's control that has resulted in Maryland moving further down the stack of states that have expressed interest in offshore wind development. I'll turn to see if my colleagues have any opening statements before we move to approval of the minutes. Our last meeting was on November 4th of 2020, and we have minutes to approve from that meeting. The vote count begins with Commissioner Herman.
Aye.
Commissioner Linton,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell,
Aye.
and Commissioner Richard.
Aye.
I vote aye. The meeting minutes are approved. Good morning, Mr. Secretary.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. We have 9 items on the consent agenda this morning. Item 1 is Level 3 Communications, filed a notice of participation in financing arrangements. Item 2 is Telco Experts, LLC and Redwood Services Group, filed a request to authorize the transfer of control of Telco Experts to Redwood Services Group. Items 3 and 4 are filings from Verizon Maryland LLC and Sprint Communications and Star Power Communications. They're both interconnection agreement amendments. Item 5 is a filing from WiMAX Communications. It's revised tariff pages. The company proposes to reduce originating switched access rates to mirror interstate access rates. Item 6 is a filing from Pilot Power Group, Inc. It's a request for a name change. Items 7 and 8 are filings from Baltimore Gas and Electric Company and the Potomac Edison Company. They're revised tariff pages to implement the Type 2 SOS rates effective December 1. And finally, item 9 is a filing from the City of Radford. It's an application for certification as a renewable energy facility for the Maryland Renewable Energy Portfolio Standard Program.
Thank you. Do commissioners have questions on any of these 9 consent agenda items? Seeing none, I will move that with respect to item number 1, that we note the company's participation in the financing of its parent company, Level 3 Financing Incorporated. With respect to item number 2, I move that we note the transfer of control to Telco Experts LLC to Redwood Services Group LLC. With respect to items number 3 and 4, I move that we approve the interconnection agreement amendment 10 days after a 30-day comment period unless adverse comments are filed. With respect to items number 5, I move that we accept the tariff provisions for filing with an effective date of November 31st, 2020. With respect to item number 6, I move that we note the name change. With respect to items number 7 and 8, I move that we accept the tariff provisions for filing with an effective date of December 1st, 2020. And with respect to item number 9, I move that we approve the application and issue a renewable energy facility ID certification number, that we direct the applicant to establish a REC account with PJM GATS within 30 days of certification, that we direct the applicant to file an on-site and behind-the-meter generation report with the Commission within 1 week of each recording of generation data with GATS, that we direct the applicant to file an EIA 860 form with updated capacity value, and that we direct the applicant to notify the Commission within 30 days if the information on which the application is based should change. The vote begins with Commissioner.
Mr. Chairman, before you call the vote, I just, one of the items, I think you said November 31st. Just misspeaking. I think it was maybe 4 and 5.
4 and 5. Let's see. 3 and 4?
Maybe 3 and 4.
Let's see. Okay, 3 and 4 did not have a date on it. Number 5. What date did I say, Commissioner O'Donnell?
No, November 31st, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, yes.
It doesn't exist.
That was incorrect. Thank you for catching that. I was way off. Let me strike the previous motion for item number 5 and replace it with, I move that we accept the tariff provisions for filing with an effective date of November 23rd, 2020. Thank you. The vote begins with Commissioner Herman.
I vote aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Linton.
Aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Aye.
And Commissioner Richard.
Aye.
I vote aye. The motions are approved. Mr. Secretary, the administrative agenda, please.
Mr. Chairman, we only have one item today. It's a filing from ChargePoint, EVgo, Tesla, and Electric. They filed a petition for approval of a full BGE, Pepco, and DPL electric vehicle charging distribution demand charge credit rider. We have multiple people present who wish to participate in this item today. We have David Hoppick, Drew McAuliffe, Annette Garofalo from the staff. We have Patrick Bean, Kevin Auerbacher, Bill Ehrlich from Tesla. We have David Bugelmans for the petitioners, along with Corrine Dumit from EVgo, Isabel Rue from EVgo, Kevin Miller from ChargePoint. We have Andrew Dick from Electrify America, and I have a Jigar Shah from Electrify America. We have Fred Huber from OPC, Dan Herson from BGE, as well as Matt Bonikowski, and then Doug Mikeel from Pepco Holdings.
Thank you. We'll begin by hearing from staff. Good morning.
Good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. David Hoppick on behalf of staff. I assume folks can hear me okay?
Hi, Mr. Hoppick, yes.
Okay, thank you. On July 8th, 2020, EVgo, Tesla, ChargePoint, and Electrify America, together the petitioners, submitted a petition in support of a prior proposal submitted by BGE, Pepco, and Delmarva to expand the existing distribution demand charge credit for multifamily, fleet, and workplace charging to public charging stations. The petitioner's filing includes an estimate of the cost of expanding the demand charge credit to public charging stations across the 3 Exelon utilities. The petitioners provided a revised cost estimate to staff that is included in staff's comments, and staff finds that this cost estimate represents a reasonable estimate of the costs of expanding the distribution demand charge credit to public chargers. To limit the cost of the proposal, staff recommends that no more than 300 public chargers receive the credit, and that the credit be limited to 50% of the aggregated maximum demand of the charging location on a going forward basis for all new eligible chargers, including multi-unit dwellings, fleet, and workplace chargers. Staff recommends that only public chargers installed from July 1st, 2020 through December 31st, 2021 are eligible for the credit to incentivize new installations. Additionally, staff recommends that the distribution demand charge credit be available for public chargers for up to 30 months from the date of the application, or until new commercial EV rates are approved by the Commission, or until the pilot ends in December 2023, whichever comes first, and that the Commission require BGE, Pepco, and Delmarva to file revised tariffs per staff's recommendation. Staff supports the expansion of this credit to accelerate the installation of privately owned public charging stations in Maryland in furtherance of the state's electric vehicle goals. Staff is available for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hoppick. We will turn next to Office of People's Counsel if you have comments.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, Fred Hoover on behalf of the Office of People's Counsel. We filed a letter with a full explanation of our comments on this proposal. In brief, we are in agreement with the granting of the petition to expand the demand credit as filed by the utilities in accordance with the conditions listed in staff's comments, and in particular, the time frame that staff advocated for the duration of the credit, and also the overall cap on the number of credits. It's our view that these types of credits and incentives work very well in the electric vehicle industry. So we think that the expansion of the credit makes sense. But with these conditions that staff has put on it, it will make sure that the costs are controlled, which is always an ongoing concern on our part. But we are supportive of the state's efforts to expand both the deployment of electric vehicles and electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Hoover. We'll turn to, I believe the joint utilities submitted one combined, when I say joint utilities, the Exelon utilities. Would you like to provide any comments?
Mr. Chairman, this is Doug Mikeel for PHI. I think we set out our position accurately in our letter. If you have any specific questions, we have Mr. Bonikowski here who would be happy to answer those specific questions. We're generally supportive. We did recommend a couple changes to staff's recommendation, but those are contained in our letter at page 3.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mikeel. We will likely have questions for you in a moment. At this point, I'll before I turn to the petitioners, are there other parties or individuals that wish to speak on this item? Hearing none, I'll turn to counsel for the petitioners.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. David Bevelmans on behalf of ChargePoint and EVgo. The companies have reviewed staff's recommendation and support staff's proposed action today, including staff's modifications to the application window and credit sunset and the 300 charger limit for public locations. As the companies have previously stated before this commission, the expansion of the DC fast charging credit to all public locations is an essential step to removing barriers to these facilities and locations to support their use case. We appreciate the support of staff, OPC, and the utilities. Thank you for consideration, and as always, we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bevelmans. It's obviously been a while since we all last met on this item. It was at the January 8th administrative meeting. At that time, I expressed that I did have some concerns with the cost estimates that were before us at the time, as well as the proposal, which would have provided existing chargers with the credit, which I had some concern with. Obviously, we've had the intervening pandemic in the meantime, but I think the future of electric vehicle charging infrastructure is still very promising. I noted with interest last night when I heard the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson in the UK, announce that the United Kingdom will be banning all gas-powered cars in 9 years from now, just 9 years. By 2030, there will no longer be offered for sale any gasoline-powered vehicles in the UK. There will be some hybrids, but mostly it'll be electrics going forward. I don't know if the United States or our state is on as aggressive a track. We do have our goal of getting 300,000 EVs on the road and registered in Maryland by 2025, and that's coming up fast, and we're still a few vehicles short of reaching that goal. But looking at the track record, looking at the trends of other states who have used demand charge credits, it is a very interesting and complex predicament that these public chargers are facing. So I'm glad to see that the revised cost estimates have come down and that we've ascertained either the support or non-opposition from Office of People's Counsel. In terms of the numbers, how did we have 300 public chargers, and I wasn't clear, is that one plug or one bank, which could have maybe 6 chargers at a rest stop? Anybody explain how we count?
So this is David Hoppick. Staff's position is 300 plugs.
Bevelmans, is that your understanding, plugs?
That's consistent with our understanding, Your Honor.
Okay. I'm going to have a few questions, but I'll yield to my colleagues if they have some questions.
I have some questions, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Herman.
Thank you. Okay, so you asked one of my questions. So it's individual chargers, not plugs. I mean, not locations. The next question I had was for staff. Why not wait until the end of the pilot? You know, we're only 36 months away as it is. So why make it confusing and add all of these extra this or that? Why not just go to the end of the pilot?
So, you know, currently under the pilot, there isn't an incentive for the public EV chargers. There is an incentive for the utilities to install utility-owned EV chargers, and you know the petitioners have made a repeated case before you about the importance of getting the infrastructure in place to encourage people to feel comfortable going ahead and making these purchases. So that's kind of how we thought about it. And, you know, the end of the pilot is December 2023, which is approximately 3 years away. So not forever, but also not too short of a period of time.
I guess I don't really understand your answer, Mr. Hoppick. I'm trying to understand, you have multiple, you know, this or this or this. I mean, to simplify it, why not just say the credits in place till the end of the pilot?
So I might not have understood your question then. So can you repeat your question? I apologize.
Sure. My question is, instead of saying 30 months or this or that, why not just say the credits in place till the end of the pilot, given that we're only 36 months versus 30 months away from the end of the pilot anyway? Why not just simplify it and say it's to the end of the pilot?
Staff was operating off of what the petitioners proposed, and then put an additional constraint of the end of the pilot. You know, I think if it just said to the end of the pilot, the cost implications would be pretty similar. So I would agree that that would not be a big change.
Okay, thank you. So I'd like to ask Mr. Bonikowski from the utilities. There's an issue about the application and the approval. How long do you anticipate the approval process would be from the application? Or maybe it's not Mr. Bonikowski, but you know, whoever from the utilities. Sorry, Mr. I guess that's right.
Yeah. Good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. Matt Bonikowski appearing on behalf of PHI. I think, you know, I think we have Christy Fleischman-Gronke, who's a little bit closer to the program details on this. I don't know if she'd be able to provide some sense for the application time and processing time for these applications. I think we may have only had a handful of them so far to date.
Yes, sure. Good morning, Commissioners, Mr. Chairman. It's Christy Fleischman-Gronke with BGE. We have about 10 business days to turn around the applications, as is our communicated time frame on our website.
So it's your position that it should say, instead of from the day of the application, from the date of the application and approval. Is that what you're looking for?
Yes, that is our request.
Okay. Let's see. With respect to Mr. Bonikowski, I'll ask you another question, which is, you're saying that if we say the credit is in effect till the end of the pilot, that we're prejudging that it might not go beyond the pilot with a new EV rate. But in fact, it could. I mean, we're not prejudging it. We're just saying that this particular credit that we're talking about now will end, and then whatever the new rate is, we're not saying it's not going to include a credit. We're just being neutral on that. Isn't that right?
Sure. So as I read the joint petitioner's request and staff's recommendation, there are actually two parts to it. There's the credit duration up to 30 months from the date of the application, or up until the pilot ends, or until the commission approves new commercial EV rates. And the piece of this that we are recommending against is that up until the commission approves new EV rates. The utilities position is that right now we're still in discussions with the working group around what form those new EV rate designs will take. We don't necessarily know that they will be incompatible with the current demand charge. So rather than determining at this point if the commission approves new EV rates, the demand charge should be eliminated, we would prefer to wait and have the commission make that determination when we actually have a concrete commercial EV rate design proposal before us.
So if the commission were to say that the credit's in effect until the end of the pilot, that would solve your issue, is that right?
Yes, that would alleviate our concern.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Herman, if I could follow up on your question and maybe pose it to Mr. Bugelman's. Mr. Hoppick stated that it was the petitioners who self-imposed the 30-month cap. I suspect you would be fine with having the credit run through the end of the pilot program, but I'll let you correct me if I'm wrong.
Sure, Mr. Chairman. So we clearly would be supportive of the credit running through the end of the program. With respect to the cutoff, if the commission approves permanent EV specific rates, what's important from the petitioner's perspective is finding a long-term solution to the demand charge issue. And the petitioners have been engaged with staff and the utilities on the development of a permanent solution. So when we proposed that kind of automatic cutoff if new rates are put into effect, it was designed to recognize that we're moving in that direction. I think the utilities position is reasonable, and when the commission, if it comes time for the commission to consider permanent rates, it can consider whether or not to keep the demand charge credit in place. So I think that's reasonable. But from our perspective, we were trying to recognize the kind of the push towards a more permanent solution for this issue.
We still have 3 years ahead of us. We'll have a lot of additional opportunities at the 6-month marks for the utilities to demonstrate the data supporting the pilot program. I don't think it's, I think it is way too early for any allegations that this demand charge credit would be inconsistent with future EV rate designs. I think that could be addressed in the work group going forward. Thank you, Mr. Beacons. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Maybe a couple questions for staff first. We may not know this yet because I think it was just suggested. What impact will adding 6 months on to the end of the pilot have on the cost estimate program?
So just trying to think through the math in terms of timing. If the commission were to approve this, assuming utility tariffs would get approved in, say, February, that would be on the order of 34 months of the program, as opposed to the current limit of 30. I believe, and there's also how quickly people apply for the credit. So if the tariff were approved, say February 1st, and a bunch of applications came in kind of right then, I think for those applicants, I think the credit would be worth approximately 10% more. But if it's going to take some time and there's a people actually submit these things, say, in around July 2021, then you're looking about the same 30-month period. And then, as I noted, the cost estimates in tables 1 and 2 and staff's comments, which are the cost estimates from the petitioners, do assume that the full credit is applied every month. And that assumes that the petitioners, the approved applicants' build demand is at least 50% of their aggregated build demand at the site. And if you look at our confidential attachments, we have reason to believe that frequently may not be the case. So that the tables 1 and 2, I think can be thought of as kind of the high end of the estimate. But I think
Commissioner O'Donnell, sorry, Mr. Opic, I just did some basic math based on the cost of the program over 30 months. Each additional month beyond 30 would be in the ballpark of about $50,000 a month.
Okay. Would it be fair to distill your response, Mr. Hopic, as de minimis cost impact? Not zero, but not huge.
Yes.
Okay. How is it determined, or is there any limitation on where these chargers are placed? How does that work? Is there a distribution?
So we have the proposed limit of up to 300 chargers, and that is broken down by utility. And that is on page 5 of our comments. So 166 for BGE, 80 for Pepco, and 54 for Delmarva. But in terms of within the service territories, I believe it's the petitioners who are deciding, not the petitioners, the applicants deciding where to place the chargers. And so it would be up to where the approved applications are located themselves. So there's nothing in staff's proposal stating where they need to be located, for example, within BGE service territory.
Okay, fair enough. Mr. Bugelmans, can you shed any light onto how that process will work in terms of where these things end up?
Sure, I could provide a high-level response, Your Honor, and then perhaps the companies could chime in on their specific processes. But as we've previously articulated before the commission, the purpose of DC fast chargers are really twofold. First, it's for quick on-the-go charging. So you're on a road trip, you're going 300, 400 miles, you need to stop, charge for 20 or 30 minutes, and continue on your way. So the logical sites for that would be, rest stops, gas stations along major freeways and roads, that type of thing. The other sort of use case for these chargers are in urban areas for people who are unable to charge at home, who need to go somewhere, charge 20 or 30 minutes and then go home and park for the night. My impression is that naturally, as the companies cite these chargers, they'll gravitate towards those locations based on the needs of their networks and their particular users. So at a higher level, that's what I would expect. I'll open the floor to any of the other companies who want to chime in on any specific processes.
Good morning, commissioners, and good morning, Chair Stanek. This is Karine Dumit from EVCO. First of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to share with you a little bit more on and address that question that Commissioner O'Donnell had asked. I think with respect to what David described, I think that's pretty much what really drives the development of DC fast charging. I think you can think about it as a way to assuage range anxiety, not only in highway corridor, but also around community locations and more within areas where EV drivers will do their everyday activities, whether it's going to a shopping center, going to a grocery store, etc. So that the more charging is ubiquitous and a part of everyday activities, the easier it is to transition to an electric vehicle. So that's kind of what I will add to what Councillor Bugelman just mentioned. Happy to answer other questions.
Chair Stanek and the commissioners, this is Kevin Miller, Director of Public Policy with ChargePoint. I wanted to also
Mr. Miller?
Mr. Miller? We work with, yes.
You might want to turn off the video. It looks like you're on a Greyhound bus. We might hear you better if, there we go. Try it again.
Upgraded to the Amtrak since I turned off the video, but not quite as exciting, I suppose. So thank Chairman Stanek. So just to point out that a lot of our customers who are entering into the e-charging market have not as much experience with these type of rate structures or first-time fueling providers. So having access to these types of incentives helps ease their anxiety to enter the market as we sort of transform and expand throughout Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. You broke up a little, but I think we got the basis of your statement.
So Mr. Bugelman's in the pilot program, we limited the public chargers to government-owned facilities to, and at least in part, to deal with equitable access issues. How do we? Is there any concern here that there won't be an equitable access because the ratepayers are picking up the tab of the incentives?
I don't think there's a particular concern, Your Honor, with respect to equitable access. Again, while this is an incentive, these facilities need to be cited where they will be used, and they need to generate revenue for the companies. So I think it's reasonable to expect that they'll be installed in public locations where the anticipation is they'll be used as much as possible. Again, a key aspect of our proposal to expand this credit is when you limit the potential locations, you're foreclosing sort of the key locations where the installation of these facilities makes sense from a use case perspective. So I don't think the commission necessarily needs to be concerned about equitable access. I think they'll be cited in locations where the public can use them, and it makes sense with respect to each company's network.
Yeah, I guess I suppose that's true, but I also could envision where strategic partnerships between corporations line up. They're benefiting off the ratepayers, and not necessarily the public interest may not be served as much as the specific interests in those strategic alliances. In other words, company A picks up grocery store B, and they decide to put them in all their locations in a strategic marketing alliance, and benefiting off the ratepayers generally. So that's kind of why I asked that question. Do you understand that? Should I not be concerned, or convince me I shouldn't be concerned about that?
Again, Your Honor, I don't think you should be concerned about it. Again, this infrastructure has a specific use case, and I think it's reasonable to trust the companies to cite them where they make sense for users to use them, either on road trips or for charging for folks in apartments. So I think just by the nature of what these are, the risk of that type of kind of self-serving or installing these facilities where they do not make sense for users, I think won't play out that way.
Yeah. Trust us is not just trust us is not something my ears as a regulator naturally kind of am free with. Trustless doesn't ring well with me, but I appreciate that. I'm just trying to do my due diligence. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Richard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think a lot of the questions I had noted have been asked, but I did have a couple just from the request that we clarify the term public charging stations and that it is intended to refer to any non-residential charging station. Could you help me understand why you're requesting that clarification?
Sure. I don't necessarily have a definition of public charger. And so the original petition that the utilities had made was to expand the demand charge credit to non-residential applications. That gave us a pretty clear operational definition to work with. And so we're just trying to get something to better understand when we go to put this into tariff language, how to structure this program. So our proposal would be to extend this to non-residential charging stations that are available to the public and not associated with workplace fleet or multi-use dwelling applications.
Okay, thank you. And then I just wanted to raise the question for the charging companies. Mr. Lanning Hartman had put in some comments, and he talked about signage to discourage obstruction of the charging facilities. They're just interested. I don't know. I don't think we really necessarily need to say anything in this act today if we were to, when we make that decision. But what do the charging companies do to try to make sure those obstructions?
So I'll take a stab at this.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at this, Commissioner Richard, and then I think the companies will need to chime in. My impression is that it's really site by site. I think there's some locations, and you see this just kind of pan out from site to site. There's some locations where there are explicit signs that say EV charging only, but there's other locations where there's a shorter amount of time allowed for non-EV charging or non-EV cars to park there. And I think it's really a site-specific analysis or question for each installation. But again, I'll pass the baton to any of the companies if they want to chime in on their specific processes.
Yeah, good morning. This is Corinne Dumit again. I will spare you from the camera so that we have better connection. I think that there's a variety of ways in which we want to make sure that when an electric vehicle comes in to charge, that space is not that space is clear and also is not obstructed. So sometimes we will mark spaces, we will have signs. Sometimes parking attendants will enforce to make sure that no other conventional vehicle parks in lieu of an electric vehicle and takes up that space. Sometimes also, and I can't think of a specific example right now off the top, but there are potential local ordinances that prevent or fine vehicles that park in EV designated spaces. So there's a variety of ways, and certainly that's something the companies work on to make sure that that service that we're providing is available in a seamless way to our customers.
Great, thank you. And then finally, there has been some discussion about about future electric vehicle rate designs, and the Sierra Club and NRDC specifically raised this as something that's very important as a longer term solution. Can you give me an idea, maybe staff and Mr. Bonikowski, where are we in the design and development of those electric vehicle rate designs?
I could take that. It's Drew McAuliffe, Mr. Chairman and commissioners. So we've had a few preliminary discussions in the working group about a rate design, a permanent EV rate design going forward. I guess staff's thoughts really is this demand charge is kind of a short-term stopgap, measure, a bridge, so to speak, to a permanent rate design. As this proposal came up, I believe last year, that was really our concerns, was this was kind of more of a stopgap measure and we wanted a more permanent solution. There definitely is some differences between the parties. Some folks obviously I don't want to speak for anybody, but some folks probably want the demand charges eliminated. I would think the utility specifically said they don't want that to happen. So I guess to put forth the thought process was, that's why we put in our proposal that the demand charge credit would end if we did come up with the new EV rates, because we really want to try and push that. Not to say that it would necessarily be incompatible, the credit with the new rates. But so long story short, it's still very preliminary, and there are quite a few differences, I would say, on what folks exactly want. For example, could we offer, you could stay on the current rate, or we can come up with a new EV charging rate, and charging applicants can have the choice of whether having a higher demand charge or maybe a lower demand charge with higher usage rates. But there really hasn't been anything concrete with that as of yet. I guess the utilities and the charging folks can speak for themselves.
Yeah, I don't know that I have anything too much to add beyond that. I know that we have been working in the working group, and a few position documents circulated by the various parties coming from the EV charging companies and the utilities provided a pretty thorough written position paper to the working group. So we're still kind of identifying areas of disagreement and areas of agreement and trying to narrow down what our path forward will be.
Okay, thank you. It sounds like it's something that could be very helpful to the integration of EVs in the state. So anyway, I'm interested just to follow any developments on how that's moving along, and if at some point maybe inform the commission whether we need to be involved in any way. So anyway, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Blanton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. I wanted to follow up on the point that Commissioner Richard just raised, which was actually touched on earlier by a few other commissioners. I'll start first with Mr. Bugelman's. In the petition that was filed on page 4, it references several other states that have commercial EV rates. I'm curious, do any of those states have demand charge credits, but separate from the commercial rates?
Thank you, Commissioner, for the question. I'm going to have to pass the mic to Corrine from EVgo to answer that question.
Yes, Commissioner Linton, would you mind just clarifying your question so that I can properly answer it? I'm not sure I fully understood. Did you mean that? Yeah, maybe I won't paraphrase. Would you mind repeating your question if possible?
Well, these in your document, you say that the states that you've mentioned there, Arizona and several other ones, have commercial EV rates.
Yes.
Do any of them have? Are there any states that have demand charges, but do not have commercial EV rates?
Yeah. So I think I can start by So I'll give you specific examples on that, and I think that in the working group proceeding, we were able to share some examples of how other utilities and jurisdictions have dealt with this particular thing. So in general, and this is maybe because DC fast charging is sort of something that is relatively new. DC fast chargers are put on the traditional commercial and industrial tariff structure that typically is applicable to loads like a grocery store or a building. So it's a slightly different type of load, but because this is an innovative technology. There hasn't been something specific to address the specificities of DC fast charging. So what we've seen in certain states, and because of that, the existing tariff structures have a demand charge that is that ends up essentially creating a effective cost on $1 per kilowatt hour that is significantly higher for DC fast charging in comparison to the traditional commercial and industrial customer. So for example, you have it under the existing tariff structures that the CNI customer is on, they will typically pay, and that will vary obviously, let's say 14 cents a kilowatt hour. And then for a DC fast charger, because the demand charge is so high, and that's, you know, no fault to anyone, but that's kind of what happens because of that existing tariff structure, your effective rate ends up being multiple times that of the average commercial customer. So sometimes we end up paying several times more than that. So in addressing that, some jurisdictions have limited the demand charge. Some jurisdictions have put a credit on the demand charge, a 50%, let's say, demand charge discount. We've seen that in Pennsylvania. We've seen that in Rhode Island. Some jurisdictions have actually completely eliminated the demand charge and instituted what we call low load factor rates, which are rates that are charged on a volumetric basis that don't include the demand charge, or that converts that demand charge into a per kilowatt hour to deal with those customers that may be DC fast chargers or not, that have a lower load factor than traditional commercial and industrial customers. So we've put together a summary of some of those examples. If it's appropriate, I'm happy. I think it's been in our work papers, but happy to speak to some specific examples of that. But I think that's in essence the variety of the ways we've seen this issue being dealt with.
So is that suggesting? Thank you for the answer. And is that suggesting that Maryland would be somewhat, I'll say, different than what some of the other states have done in terms of approaching it this way?
I think, if I can, no, I think Maryland would be consistent with how we've seen other jurisdictions address it. And in fact, I think with that fix, Maryland would be, essentially, I would say, consistent exactly with the types of demand charge, with the type of ways we've seen that demand charge being dealt with. So on the contrary, I think that's a step in that direction that is consistent with other jurisdictions.
Okay, so for the solutions that you just mentioned, were those established before the commercial tariffs were adopted? And I guess my question, and maybe this might go to staff instead, but for us here, are we getting ahead of the work group by proceeding with adopting the demand charge credit separate from the EV rates that the work group is still discussing?
Good morning, Commissioner Linton. I'm Drew McCall from half again. I wouldn't say we're getting ahead of the working group. As I kind of was articulate to Commissioner Richard, there's definitely some differences on how exactly that EV rate would work. So that could be, frankly, quite a lengthy time period to get something on paper, I think, a tariff. But we have heard from the petitioners more than once, that these demand charges are quite cumbersome on them and really affect their bills, particularly if they have low usage. So we're kind of thinking this, like I was again trying to say to Commissioner Richard, as kind of a bridge, particularly since you expect EV adoption to increase over time, and therefore help out the charging folks, because the lower usage they have, the more that demand charge really hurts them. So if they have more and more usage as EV adoption increases, that demand charge will become less of a factor, at least somewhat. So like I was saying, I think we think of this as kind of a bridge. So, the working group can continue its discussions and hopefully get some sort of permanent commercial EV rate.
Good. All right, thank you. That's all I had. Thanks everybody who answered. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Obviously, the work group has been working diligently since we last met in January, and has some additional work to take on over the next 3 years. When we approved the portfolio last January 2019, we did approve at the time 909 public chargers, the majority of which are level 2. If the commission votes on this proposal today, I think there will be a force multiplier in terms of DC fast charging equipment that will be available to Marylanders, and I think that's a good thing. Just a quick anecdote in regards to signage, the issue Commissioner Richard mentioned that one of the filing parties mentioned. I was at the New Carrollton Library not too long ago, and I noticed that the 2 chargers there were blocked by cars that were not electric vehicles. There happened to be a police officer parked at the front of the library, so I asked him, I said, hey, should they be there? Can they be ticketed? And there was clear signage, don't park here, EVs only. And he was very diligent. He actually took out his code and he said, I've seen this before, but there's no law to allow me to issue a citation, so I'm not going to. He said, if I see them come out, I'll say something. Fact of the matter is, the state of Maryland has no law that would allow law enforcement to ticket or tow a vehicle, unless, of course, it's on some type of private property. There were legislative attempts earlier this year to modify the law to allow for EV signage, but unfortunately, with the pandemic, that legislation did not move out of committee. But it is one, I think, as EVs proliferate, there needs to be some etiquette among both EV drivers and etiquette amongst those who drive ICE vehicles and those who drive EV vehicles. But I believe that'll come soon enough. Based on the discussions, particularly the discussion and questioning by Commissioner Herman, I'm going to propose a motion that would streamline some of the requirements, including that we no longer have a 30-month cap, that it would extend to the end of the program or such time when the commission approves commercial EV rates. That would avoid any potential overlap or conflict of having the credit in existence at the same time that that a new EV rate, if any, the commission approves before December 31st of 2023 comes into existence. So I will make that proposal unless I hear any objection, or the commissioners could object by way of a vote. Okay. At this time,
Mr. Chairman, this is Christy Fleischman Gronke with BGE. I'd like to ask a clarifying question.
Yes.
Earlier in the discussion, we had talked about that the credit is 50% of the aggregate installed chargers at a location. And then we discussed that the 300 would be plugs. And I just wanted to note that BGE has a demand charge credit already enrolled that has 40 plugs. So we're issuing one credit for, the 50% of the installed capacity of 40 plugs at one location. So the 166 plugs that was noted for BGE could potentially be, a handful of locations that would be receiving the demand charge credit. So I just wanted to make that clarifying point. EVgo, Tesla, and others, are installing large banks of chargers at many locations, which will definitely eat into the plug count that we have to provide credits on.
Okay, and so we hear you and those numbers. Are you making a proposal or modification?
I was under the assumption that the 300 would be credits, so that would be locations. But up for discussion.
Okay, and I think you heard from staff, and Mr. Hoppeck's going to jump in a second, and then Mr. Bugelman's shaking hands. So let's turn to Mr. Hoppeck.
Yeah, so staff's position is the 300 chargers, so plugs, but the limit is specifically for public chargers, not including already existing multi-unit family dwellings, fleet, or forgetting the final category that already exists, but for public charging that is not multi-unit dwelling, workplace, or fleet.
Okay, thank you for that.
That clarification is on the record, but we're still, it's 300 plugs. When we say charger, it's one plug. Mr. Bugelmans, did you have anything to add? I saw you shaking your head, yes or no?
So BGE's comment did give me some heartburn. I understand the issue with respect to, large sites using up significant amounts of the credit. I know this isn't a negotiation. It's difficult because I'm not in a room with all the companies. So if appropriate, Your Honor, maybe it would be appropriate to open the floor to them. But that is a good point, and it could unnecessarily limit the program to just a few sites. So with that, I'll open up the floor.
Would it not be up to the utility if they want to spend 5 credits on a bank? That would be 5 credits that they can't disperse elsewhere. If your members would like to speak to that. Any of the petitioners care to provide input? Okay, I don't hear any of your members speaking up. Okay. Anything else?
Chairman?
Mr. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Mr. Chairman, it almost feels like this 11th hour uncertainty on this item calls for go back and work it out. Bring it back to us when it's ready. That's just how I'm feeling right now. It's like, good Lord. We're almost ready to take a vote here, and then we got this degree of uncertainty thrown out there.
May I just...
Hello, yes, proceed.
Yes, sorry. So I just wanted to clarify. I think that the staff's recommendation as it is right now is something that is in line and consistent with what we have. I think, and I speak for EVgo, but I know that this is also something with the other companies. I think that some staff's recommendation is something that we would be supportive of. And I think in line with what we have engaged in this process. So I think we've talked about it in the notion of 300 ports, and I think that that's something that we're all in supportive of. So I'm happy, without saying anything further, I would say that this has been in the works, and that's something that we would certainly support and hope that we can. We don't have to reopen up the whole process.
Counsel for the petitioners, I have to say, what's going on here now? What's your position in light of Ms. Gronke's comments?
I think if the petitioning companies are comfortable with tying it to 300 charge ports, that's our position. I'm sorry to interject uncertainty at the end of the process. I just heard BGE's comment. I wanted to make sure the companies were comfortable with that. Again, it's difficult in this format. I couldn't kind of quietly speak to them. So if the petitioners are comfortable and that's their understanding, I think we can move forward today. I'm sorry about that.
And Ms. Gronke, can you express your concern again with the proposal? Looks like Ms. Gronke has a connectivity issue. Do we have counsel for BGE or Exelon?
Hi, Mr. Chairman, Dan Hurston for BGE. I think the concern was regarding how many charger plugs are at each location. And we were concerned about a particular location having multiple plugs, and if they all got the credit, that it would eat into the 166 credits that are available to the company. Did not anticipate a situation where only a few sites, physical sites, were taking up all the credits.
Mr. Urson, thank you for standing in. It looks like Ms. Fleischman-Gronke is having some trouble, and I understand your concern there. You would be allocated 166 of them. Ms. Gronke, are you with us?
I believe so.
No, just barely. If you try turning off your video.
Okay.
Yeah, let's try it again.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Okay.
Mr. Herson attempted to answer on your behalf, but if you'd like to speak.
Sure. I wasn't so much a concern. I was just clarifying to make sure that my understanding was correct, that we were limiting it to number of plugs, and that could translate into a few locations.
Well, when you say a few, these locations aren't going to have 40 plugs each, are they?
Some may. I mean, that's the demand charge credit that we have right now for a multifamily property has 40 plugs.
Yeah.
I would say that the utilities,
if it's level 2. I apologize, sorry.
Okay. We have multiple mics open right now. I think it would be incumbent upon the utilities to work with the private chargers so that we could get the most bang for this buck and have these chargers spread out. We don't need one bank with 166 chargers taking up the entire demand credit. And Mr. Bugelmans, I'll hold the petitioners to make sure that happens, and we're not effectively spending all these credits in one spot in each utility's service territory. Unless the commissioners are... Ms. Karine, your mic is still open.
Yes, I was only going to ask, and I don't need to take much of your time. I was just going to ask, is perhaps Ms. Fleischman's comment was related to level 2 versus DC fast chargers. So I think those two things are getting a little bit conflated. And I think that from the petitioner's perspective, what we have put forward and have worked on for the last several months, and that is in our petition that we have briefed to several parties, I think that we continue to support that, and staff's recommendation is based on that. And we've had several conversations with many parties. So I would just respectfully maybe reiterate that we are supportive of staff's recommendation based on all of the papers and petition that we've put forward and that we've had a discussion with all the parties.
Thank you, and you've made that clear. And we are talking about fast chargers, Ms. Gronke. Are we not? Are we talking about installing large banks of DC fast chargers at single locations?
That was a good point. The multifamily applicant that we have in our demand charge credit today is 40 level 2 charging ports. I do know, some of the larger companies like Electrify America and EVgo do put in a higher number of DC fast chargers, but probably more in the tune of 10 or so charging stations per location.
Thank you, and thank you, Karine, for that clarification. I hope we're not installing DC fast chargers in multi-unit family dwellings. I think that would just be a waste of resources and infrastructure and equipment. What we're approving here, 300 public chargers. These are fast chargers. These aren't level 2. They need to be put in proper places so that they're utilized in commuting corridors and not in an apartment building. This isn't workplace charging where a car is going to sit for 8 hours a day. With that, I'm prepared to make a motion unless my colleagues have any thoughts or concerns. Okay, I would move that the commission require BGE, Pepco, and Delmarva Power and Light Company to extend the EV charger distribution demand credit to public charging stations, set the maximum distribution demand charge credit to 50% of aggregated maximum demand of the charging location on a going forward basis for all new applicants, workplace and fleet chargers, and limit the credit to 300 public chargers. And I move that we require that the distribution demand credit be available to public chargers until the pilot period ends on December 31st, 2023, or until such time the commission approves commercial EV rates. And we limit the credit to public charging stations installed on or after July 1st, 2020 and through December 31st, 2021. Finally, I move that we require BGE, PEPCO, and Delmarva Power and Light to file revised tariff sheets per staff's recommendation in its comments dated November 12th, 2020. The vote begins with Commissioner Herman.
Aye.
Commissioner Linton.
I'll vote aye for now. It's a reluctant aye, but it's an aye.
For a moment, I thought you froze. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Similarly, aye.
Commissioner Richard.
Enthusiastic, yes.
I vote aye. The motion is approved. Thank you for the parties for working on this rather complicated issue. The commission will be in brief recess. What will happen is I will now adjourn the administrative meeting, but we will reconvene at 11:20 a.m. for a public briefing in docket PC 44 with respect to utility time of use pilot programs. We are in recess until 11:20. And this meeting is adjourned.